Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin, Season 1, Episode 5, Chapter 5. In this episode, Jane attempts to get to know her father, and it's not easy, because bless his heart, but he is a bit of a dodo. Also, she finds out what Michael's been keeping from her. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Lauren for commissioning this episode. What's up, Lauren? I really was excited for this episode, you guys. You all know I have been waiting for her to realize that Michael was cheating. I was about to say cheating. Well, he was lying to her on a grand scale that I feel honestly is a little bit akin to cheating, considering the depth of the deception here. It feels like a really big deal. So I don't think that is an out of line comparison, to be honest. Rowan's in the chat. I'm in hour 12 of work. Oh, I'm sorry, Rowan. So glad I have signal in the SoCal desert for this. Welcome. I am very jealous of you being in a desert. It sounds warm. But, anyway, so, all right. This episode begins with her still not talking to Shamara. I am not mad at her over this. I think that, it's the kind of thing where people like to just sort of say the silent treatment is immature as a blanket statement. And as much as it can be if it's done in a certain way, and that is to say, tell Ron that Parvati told Seamus that, that kind of silent treatment is immature. But if you are just deciding you are going to distance yourself from somebody and not speak to them for a time because you don't know how to sort out the way you're feeling about a major betrayal, I feel like that's a time where we can say the silent treatment is fully warranted and actually sort of a mature way to approach things, to be honest. Because I honestly am a person who can say things I regret later and react in ways that, looking back, I'm like, whoa, that was super rude or uncalled for or cruel, even though in the moment I am not lashing out to be cruel. There are people who do that, which sucks, and they reach for things that they know are specifically going to hurt a person because they want to hurt them. I'm not like that, but I will be thoughtlessly cutting in a way that isn't helpful to the person I'm speaking to and isn't really helpful to me, except in that it makes me feel better in the moment to say things exactly how I see them. That kind of thing that people call brutal honesty, which the emphasis is on the word brutal, and brutal isn't really what you want to do to be with people that you love. And that tends to be when that sort of thing pours out of me with people that I love. So I have come to learn that for myself, backing away from a situation and not speaking for a while until I have got my thoughts a little bit more sorted out and organized is a really wise thing to do to keep myself from saying some shit that is going to really hurt someone or that I will regret, or both. So I think that this is fair. And she's going to go stay with Michael. And it was really like a moment for me. I at first was like, oh, wow, she's going to go stay with Michael. Okay. They're fucking getting married. Like, I'm over here like this is a really major step. And it didn't occur to me that living together, like, this is the thing. Okay, I'm gonna rant for like a brief moment here. And you guys, I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this. I have to sort of mention it because of the nature of this. So she's a virgin. Her and Michael had never slept together. And thus, she has no idea what it is to live with him. Because if she's not sleeping with him, she can't live with him. Like, how is that even going to work? Except that she's about to move in with him, but they're getting married in a week. So she can live with him for a week and not fuck. And then, you know, they get married and it's fine. All that said, the concept that, like, at one time, remaining a virgin until marriage and then moving into a man's household immediately upon marriage, never having lived with him before, especially among a certain class of people who maybe had servants, that sort of thing. It makes more sense because there is a machine already in place that you are moving into, right? And I can understand how that might actually work out ultimately. That is not taking into account the fact that the man that you're marrying might be a monster or a douchebag or any number of things. But that feels weirdly, if there's a household involved, less risky somehow. But knowing the way that we live today, we only have two people in a household at first, and they maybe decide to have kids, maybe not, whatever. The two of them are solely responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of this household. And you, a woman, have never lived with this man before, have never had a sleepover until the previous episode with him before, and thus have no real idea how he lives from day to day. And you are proposing to move in and make a home and permanently attach yourself to what amounts, in my mind, to a stranger. Because I cannot help it. If you haven't lived with a person, you don't really know them. That's all it is. That's all it comes down to for me. You can have gotten to know them in a myriad of ways in terms of their personality and what they like and dislike. And it seems like she and he have talked about sex and what he likes and dislikes. So as long as sex isn't totally off the table, I feel that you can get an idea of how you are, if you're compatible or not in that sense. Just an idea. It's not foolproof though, because that kind of like chemistry, that's hard to pin down. That said, it is such a notorious thing for men to expect women to take on the management of the entire household when the woman moves in, even when they are both fully employed, that knowing what I know now and having gone through the relationships I have, I simply could never. I couldn't do it. And I don't think this is going to be something that the show necessarily like decides to deal with because it's not super fun. But, you know, and what we've seen of Michael's apartment or his house, whatever it is, he keeps it in good shape. It doesn't seem like he's a slob. Nevertheless, though, it is remarkable how guys who are otherwise not slobs can let their shit slide when they think somebody else is going to start taking care of it for them. So anyway, I know this doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it was just the thought of like the fact that they are going to be getting married shortly. And yet she hasn't lived with him. She hasn't been in this, had a home with him and figured out whether or not they can work together as a team in this way, which is key in my opinion. And this is something that Owen and I have really had to work on, because as much as he can be fairly neat, he was also neat when he had a lot less to manage in his life in the house. And since I've moved in, we've gotten new furniture, we've gotten additional pets, we've got all kinds of things. His job has gotten more stressful, and we have had to really sit down and talk about the way we're going to divvy things up. And it has been an adjustment period because I was taking care of a lot and having to ask for help, which I kind of resented. And then the dogs and everything, it started to get kind of out of control. And I finally had to sit down with him and be like, look, we can't keep Pippin if I'm also going to be managing the house. I can't do it all. And he has been really stepping up, and it has felt like we are a team because we are working together and both trying to make the house a pleasant place. We're both working on it together. And that to me is a sign of having like a strong relationship. If both people feel like they can rely on one another and that they know a certain thing is going to get taken care of. She hasn't had to go through anything like that specifically with Michael. And those are the day-to-day things that I think wind up mattering more than a lot of others. Like, I think you can have a really great chemistry and personality match with somebody, but if the day-to-day stuff about how they live doesn't mesh with yours, your relationship will wind up in worse shape than another person who you don't mesh as well with in that way, but who is super reliable and, you know, does their share. I think it's something that is unromantic and we don't like to think about because of that. But as I get older, I realize just how important that is and how it is a big part of like weathering through things. Can you count on somebody? You know, that is what marriage is supposed to be, is becoming partners. And if you don't feel like your partner is your partner, then that doesn't make a marriage. Rowan is here. I wouldn't think of dating someone seriously without getting a look at their bathroom or inside of their fridge. Like, stop by one day when they don't know you're coming. That kind of thing. Just because they will clean up when they know you're coming by. They will show you their best self. You can't judge anything by that. You have to see them when they don't know. Because whether or not they keep up a good front when you first move in, after a couple of years, that begins to fall away and you start to really see what their baseline standard is. And that's a very different scenario. And it's the kind of thing I wish I had like really understood, but it wasn't talked about the way it is today. Women are much more open these days about how much more of the house they manage and like the distribution of labor and the way that works and how unfair it is. And I didn't get that. So when I married Brendan, I wasn't seeing a lot of the red flags about how long it took for him to clean up before I could come over one time. And even though he had spent literally hours cleaning up, when I came over, it was still pretty bad. And now I know, having lived with him, that he can stand levels of sheer filth that were untenable for me. I absolutely could never. But I didn't realize that. I wasn't looking for those signs. And now that is like, when I came to visit Owen, it was a big factor for me. The fact that he had a home that he like took care of the bills and managed everything surrounding it and didn't have help doing that. When I moved out after my divorce, Brendan had to get in touch with me for passwords for the gas and electric, everything, because he didn't know how to log in to pay for things because I was always the one doing it. That kind of thing. So anyway, I'm sorry. I know I'm getting into like a whole other thing here because ultimately she walks out and isn't staying with him. So it doesn't really seem like it's going to matter, but it's just a sort of an additional part of not having sex before marriage. I think is riddled with its own kinds of problems, but honestly, not living with somebody before marriage to me is a bigger deal. Like that to me feels like a mistake. But anyway, so the opening scene here is her being the sort of mother figure in the household. And she's really struggling with this. She was her mother's mother in that her mom is young and dating and seeing guys and dressing sort of provocatively and asking for her opinion on what she's wearing. And Jane is like setting boundaries about how late she should be out and how much she should drink and everything, you know, all of this stuff. And then we see her with her abuela and she's thinking about, like, her abuela comes in and says, can you research something for me on your computer? Diabetes. And I'm wondering if that is like her having symptoms of it, or if this is something she's looking into for another reason. It was times like these when young Jane wished especially hard for a father. Someone responsible and wise. Someone who would take care of things so she wouldn't have to. Someone like Jimmy Smits. I love this. This is her secret suspicion, that it's Jimmy Smits who is her father. And this, I really appreciated these moments being shown to us, because I can easily imagine how Jane wound up being the sort of mother figure in a household and managed things. But it's small things like this. Like when you think of somebody having to be older than their age, really young, we often think of it in terms of maybe trauma. You know, somebody in the household was an alcoholic, somebody in the household left, or, you know, with her father, something like major. Not to say that her father leaving isn't trauma, but it's a different thing than like living with abuse or something like that. But like in my household, my mother had me when she was barely 18 years old. She was a fucking kid. And my dad barely spoke English. And I grew up in a household that I felt very aware of how neither of them was really fully equipped to cope with certain situations. You know, my father with the language barrier and the fact that he had grown up in a country with like, he had very few specific skills that he could use. And he had sold drugs for the first several years of my life, and thus was not in a position of stability with his job. And I was like, I understood that on some level. And then my mother being so young and kind of still figuring things out while she's trying to raise and protect me, I wound up in this sort of scenario a lot, you know, of just like my parents asking me for help with things or not knowing things that I already knew or had found out. And there's a real unmoored sense when you grow up that way of like, I don't think that my parents have got my back or could have my back, especially once I really started to get older and I went to boarding school and college began to loom on the horizon. And this was purely out of their wheelhouse. Like my father never completed high school. My mother never completed high school. They both had GEDs, and college, forget it. And they had no idea about like student loan process and FAFSA and all of that. I was completely alone in all of that. And it's just an odd place where it's like your parents want better for you than they had. But if they really do begin to accomplish that, and you are sort of going off by yourself, it feels a little, it's scary, but I don't know. There's another word here. And I'm sort of, but I remember meeting people and them telling me that I seemed older than my mom. And that is certainly the vibe with Jane and her mother, you know, that she is the stable, steady one. And her mother is the one sort of like flitting around. And that's not to say that she doesn't love her mom and that they're not close. It's just that can happen when you're the child of somebody who had you really young. You know, it's sort of, you wind up being imbued with almost extra like wisdom because you watched them making mistakes in a much more obvious way as you grew than a lot of kids are allowed to see their parents make. You know, when you have kids older, I think you make more of an effort to shield your kid from your fuck ups, and you're able to do that. You know, you have a certain kind of boundary that grows when you have your child past the age of like, you know, 25 or something. But when you're that young, I don't think you really even understand establishing that boundary. So I know I'm not alone in this. And I know Rashawn has this experience a lot too. Just, it's a really wild thing to be super aware of your parents' fuck ups and flaws as a kid, like a real small kid and grow up hyper aware of them, because there are so many stories out there of people who like, the moment I realized my parents weren't perfect, and I literally can't remember a time when I didn't know that they would screw up on the regular, you know? So anyway, this is the whole thing here is her like really in this episode, the focus is on her trying to get to know her father and struggling with this combination of desire to meet him, to get to know him, to connect with him, also holding back on the expectations of things being a certain way that she's like imagined for a long time. And you can't help doing that, I'm sure, when you're in this situation, you don't know your father. It's going to be on your mind all the time what it would be like to meet them, and what do you say, and what kind of questions you'll ask, and whether they will be a certain way, or, you know, and that could be anything from personality to, would they like this movie? Do they like this food? Are they soft-spoken? Are they boisterous and extroverted? All these different things. And she is really unprepared for the way he turns out to be, because she is wanting to relate to him in a way that is a lot more low key, a lot more on a super personal level. And instead, the way that he orchestrates their meeting, he's handling it like the Emmys or the Oscars. Everything is handled. Everything is choreographed and staged. And in his mind, this is very impressive. You know, he's obsessing over what he's going to wear. He's obsessing about his hair and the lighting and the archway that she walks through. And just all of the details that he is paying attention to are utterly do not matter to her. In fact, they feel as forced as they are. And, you know, if this was her and she handled everything like this on his behalf when she was meeting him, he would love it, right? This is like, to him, I think his love language is doing it up, paying extra attention and making things super special. So, you know, we do this sometimes. We perform the thing that's important for us at someone else for whom that thing is not important. And then we're upset they don't take it the way it was intended, the way we would have taken it. I am very guilty of this. I am very guilty. Like, it's just the kind of thing that I have always had trouble understanding, that just because somebody loves me and appreciates certain things about my personality doesn't mean that they value the exact same things as me. So I will often do the thing where I like create a situation that I would really like and realize too late, this isn't really for them though, then it's about me. So yeah, she gets like led through this arch of flowers and everything. And when they call his name and tell her she's here, like the fact that she's meeting him on set initially is already weird. Like, they can't just meet at a restaurant and talk. They can't just like, and literally anywhere else. And then there's this big gesture and the spotlight, like it settles on him, and it's the narrator saying he had been dreaming of this moment ever since learning that he had a daughter. He wanted to make a grand entrance. And the light's on him as he's slowly walking down the stairs, but the stairway is really, really long, and he starts to realize that he needs to hurry his ass up a little bit. So he kind of like jogs nervously the rest of the way down. And it's kind of funny to me too, that obviously the point of this was, I want to make an entrance that my daughter will never forget when I first meet her, but you've met her already. And she has gotten to know you a little bit, at least in the fact that you are a very awkward man with weirdness. And trying to retroactively make this like the first time she's ever going to see you, it's not going to work, my guy. You know, it's just, it's too late for that first impression. That's done. But he comes up to her and she calls him Rogelio. He tries to say, call me dad. And she's like, no, it has to be Rogelio. He asks if he can hug her and goes in for it. And he's like really into it, you know, and it's hard because he really means well throughout all of this. He is such a himbo that he's not singing the way it registers for her. So yeah, we have this like, we jump to a moment actually where it looks like the two of them are shit talking Shamara, and the two of them like connect over how much they hate her. And she's like, oh, and I made this doll of her. Do you want to stick pins in it? And he says, no, we should set it aflame. And then they start giggling together. And then we cut to Shamara, and she's like talking to her mother, and they'll sit there and laugh and watch as I explode. And Abuela says, you sound like a crazy person. But yeah, there's this big, he sets up this table for them to have dinner in front of a huge backdrop of Mayan ruins. Now, anybody who has read the Dresden Files is going to know what the fuck Chichen Itza is. I'm really curious if anybody else had the reaction that I had, because for those who are not aware, Chichen Itza is a very important location in a very important installment of the Dresden Files. Is a big deal. So for this to just be in the background and casually mentioned here, I was like, what? But yeah, this beautiful meal, they have like these gold charger plates and gold rimmed wine glasses. He's trying to insist that she have wine until she reminds him that she's pregnant. And he's having wine because he's super nervous, and he drinks it very fast. Like, it's a big glass, and he tosses it back. He tries to do a toast to my daughter, Jane Gloria Villanueva. Gloriana. Jane Gloriana. And he is obviously mortified that he got that wrong, which is part of why he sucks this glass of wine down so hard. I really, truly, like, guys, I felt for him so bad. He is trying so hard. He really wants to make a good impression, but it is the most awkward thing in the entire world. Like, not only is this so overdone, but a detail that I really appreciated about the scene that is, I have to imagine it's on purpose. The table is set up at the height a regular dining table would be. But when they are seated, they are in these armchairs that are a little too low to the ground to work as dining chairs. So they're sort of sitting further back from the table than you would ordinarily at a meal, which means that they're distanced further from each other physically. And the table is at this awkward height where it's like above her bra line. It's like the table hits at around the beginning of her like cleavage. It's a very high up, the sort of thing where like eating would, I have to imagine, be really awkward unless they pulled the chairs extremely close to the table, and that would be awkward in a new way. So the whole way that this is set up, it's like opulent and beautiful, but incredibly impractical and uncomfortable, even though it looks like it would be the opposite. In practice, it just doesn't work at all. So he starts talking about how Chichen Itza is important to him and how he went there and prayed, and it was a really spiritual experience. And when she asks what he prayed for, he says, great fame. And she's obviously just hugely disappointed by that answer. And then he says, I'm sure you have many questions about me. And she says, yes, I do. And she starts to like reach for probably the baby pictures or maybe a list of questions she wrote. But he says the best way to get those answers is by reading this. And he gestures to somebody off stage who brings her the unauthorized, exposed, unbelievable biography of Rogelio de la Vega. Is that his last name? Just the most impersonal way of handling this. It's a wonderful version of sending a gift basket to a woman that you just fucked. Like, yeah, giving the daughter you just met the book that any stranger could read and thinking that's the way to approach it is terrible. So, and then he says something about how, I wonder what we have in common. And we cut to her saying to Michael, we have nothing in common. He is shallow and vain, and I am freaking out about this. And she wants to talk to her mother, but she's not speaking to her mother. So the impulse to go to her, it hurts extra. This is the sort of thing that I always think about in terms of like when somebody that you care about dies and it's a person who is hugely important to you, that anytime a big thing happened, you would text them about it. And now here you are living a life where you can't do that. They're not there. And how fucking awful that is. Like, it's the sort of thing that I had when my father first died. I would have these impulses every now and then. I'm getting choked up. I'm sorry. Of just being like, God, I haven't talked to him in a long time. I should call him. I would like forget, and suddenly I would stop and realize why I hadn't talked to him in a while. And what's killing me with Jane is that her mother's right there and she could just go talk to her. It doesn't have to be like this, but the grievance she has is very real, and going and being vulnerable with somebody who hurt you like that. I mean, you can't just turn that off, combined with the fact that Michael mentions, I know you're not speaking to her, but we're getting married in a week and she's going to regret it, or you're going to regret it if she's not there. And I was like, oh, that didn't even occur to me. Like, again, another reason why they should put this wedding off. I don't think this is a good idea. So, his suggestion, Michael's, is to have her father come to their place, their turf, and have dinner with them there and give it another try. And maybe it will be different if you're not, on his territory. And I was like, that's actually a pretty solid idea. I'm into it. And I should mention too, the beginning of this episode, we have him preparing a drawer for her in the house, and he gets interrupted by his brother, Billy, I think is his name, showing up. And we have a conversation later where Michael's talking about Billy. I was like, not even sure she knew he had a brother kind of thing. But she does, and she's aware that Billy is seen as bad news by Michael, but doesn't know the extent of it clearly because of the way that Billy keeps sort of holding over Michael's head that, well, there's things I could tell her. I could go see her and really fuck things up for you. This is something that I am really curious about, because Michael has the conversation with her about the fact that he used to steal cars and do things with her, or do things with his brother that were illegal, that could get them in trouble, and that his brother basically took the fall for some things that he himself did. But the fact that he hadn't told Jane this stuff, right? And she says to him, I wish you would tell me these things because I am currently in the midst of a fallout with my mother because she kept secrets. And now you're here keeping secrets. And what the fuck? Rightfully so. And I'm thinking at first, I'm glad that he told her because I have been wondering, it's been sort of on my mind, the thing with his brother, and he should get that off his chest and make sure that that's in the air is cleared before they get married. And then I had to step back and be like, what kind of an idiot am I? Of course, that's not what it is. What he told her was, on the surface, bad enough that it sounds like he made a major confession. It sounds like it's good enough to be what he's been hiding this whole time. But this came out with only a little prodding from her. The reaction he is having when he sees his brother is a lot more dramatic. Every time that his brother says something about Jane, and he's like, you better stay away from her. Michael mentions to Jane, I'm trying to keep him away from you. He says it in such a way as if to be like, he is trouble and being around him is trouble. And if he is in our lives at all, it will only bring bad things. And she accepts that at face value. And I don't. I feel like the specificity of him talking to, like, keeping his brother away from Jane, whatever his brother knows, would actually be a deal breaker. And with the wedding coming up, I am really starting to wonder if that's going to be the deal breaker. If his brother is going to drop a bomb, and that will be what causes the wedding to be delayed. Because what it comes down to in the end is whether I believe she and Michael are going to get married. And I don't know if I do. I feel like usually if we're going to go with what, like, soap opera rules, telenovela rules, a wedding is a place where you have a major revelation, there's a scene, and then somebody walks out. The wedding very rarely does what it's originally intended to do. They don't get married. Usually the wedding is just to facilitate all of the various characters getting together in one location so that they can have it out in a way that everyone sees that is extra dramatic, oftentimes fueled by jealousy because somebody's marrying somebody else, or alcohol because they're drunk or whatever. So I am going to say that the wedding is going to happen halfway. And either she finds out something that causes Michael to bail, or causes herself to bail about Michael, or he bails for some reason. I'm starting to wonder now, if we've got like telenovela rules, I guess it depends like how intensely I think we're going to follow that model, whether or not we have to worry about Michael dying. Because I can't tell how hard this show would go in, like he's involved in the investigation of, what is his name? Sin Nostro? Is that the name? Man Without a Face. And it is certainly possible he winds up in the line of fire, literally or figuratively, and he winds up dead. But that would happen. The only way that would happen, I think, is if things ramped up significantly from where they are now. And I don't feel like that could possibly happen before the end of this season at the rate things are currently going. That storyline is a bit of a slow background burn at the moment. And I think that we aren't really going to get anywhere, that he is going to be in danger anytime soon. Oh, thank you. Rowan says De La Vega for Rogelio's last name, and Sin Rostro. Okay, cool. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is I don't think her and Michael are going to get married. That doesn't necessarily mean that they break up. But, and the question also is Jane going to stay a virgin? Because that's literally the title of the show. Are we going to keep on with that? is this going to be something that, like, we keep calling the show that even though that major aspect shifts? I frankly couldn't care less if that shifted and she did have sex. That doesn't matter to me. But it would probably change a lot of dynamics for her. And I don't know if we're ready for that either. Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sort of spinning out here, but it just sort of, I like to think about the vibe that a show gives me and what it feels like they'd be willing to do. And especially considering how clearly they're spoofing telenovelas here, there's a lot of room in there to add drama. So we also find out that Billy is dating Jane's friend from work. I don't remember her name. It's kind of funny because they're clearly meant to be like really good friends, but we don't see them talking that much. And because you only see them at work together, the impression that I really get is that they're work friends, which is a very different type of thing than just being friends. So it was wild to me when it turns out like she's dating Billy, Michael's brother, and has been for a while. They had sex in Michael's bathroom, apparently, at her like engagement party. And yeah, 6 weeks they've been dating. And when she's like, why didn't you tell me? She said, well, he didn't want to upset Michael. And he figured if it burned out and it was nothing, then who cares? But now at this point, it's been 6 weeks. And yeah, we should say something. And it's a terrible moment for, I felt really bad because the reaction that Jane has is, do you think it's possible he's just using you to piss Michael off? Which of course this girl is offended by, and I would be as well. But we know that is very likely what's happening. And when it gets back to Michael, both him and Jane think that's what's happening. And especially he shows up at Michael's door and he wants Michael to just give him $2,000. And the fact that now he is saying, yeah, go ahead and tell them we're dating to this girl when he's been keeping it a secret this whole time, to me means that he is amping up the pressure on Michael. He asked for $2,000. Michael seemed to me to make it pretty clear he has no intention of paying him anything. And so his brother was like, oh, okay, I'm going to remind you that I am closer than you think. And that not only am I, dating your fiance's friend, but I could let anything slip and it would get to Jane and you wouldn't even have to know about it. And I wouldn't even have to contact Jane directly. And, he's essentially like blackmailing Michael at this point. Whatever Michael did has to have been pretty bad. I'm just so curious about this. Rowan says, I wish there was more focus on Jane's friendships. Yeah, same. It's the kind of thing that like that kind of friendship doesn't really work in a lot of telenovelas because the point of setting up friendships like that is for them to wind up betraying you and doing something shitty. And I can understand not really being eager to portray that kind of friendship in a show that otherwise feels like it's attempting to have a wholesome main character, I guess is really the word I want. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe they could have gotten around it some way because she has a good relationship with her mother, even with the betrayal. But whatever. All that to say that, you guys, I have had just very mixed feelings about Michael this whole time. I've been real back and forth on him. And I think that now that she has found out he was lying about knowing that Petra was having an affair, and she very quickly understands why he was lying and the fact that it was like very selfishly motivated. If she finds out he was hiding another thing, I think that's curtains for Michael. I don't like the only way he gets away with it is if whatever secret he's keeping, it turns out there's a really, really compelling reason that he kept that secret. You know, something that he was like protecting somebody, or really that's like the only thing I can think of. But so yeah, that's the deal with Billy this episode. And then let's talk with Raphael and Petra. Raphael has this moment with Petra where he's basically like, I can't believe that you are trying to stay together throughout all of this. You fucking lied to me. And she says, I made a mistake. And this is exactly what Jane's mother says to her. And he responds in the same way, which is to say a mistake is like forgetting your keys. You made a conscious choice repetitively for 23 years to lie to me. And that's what he's saying to Petra. You fucked my best friend and constantly lied about it. And yeah, that's something that I get real salty about. People try and use the word mistake to apply to a repeated choice. That is no longer a mistake. That is who you are. You know, like you reach a point where if you make the same choice, the same wrong choice enough times, you have decided this is the person you are. This is who you are going to be. And there's only so far it was a mistake that, you know. So she has this conversation with her mother, who is being really intense with her about the fact that she has got to step up her attempts to reconcile with him. And she tells her to manage her beauty because that is her main weapon. And it's not your only weapon. She says something to her about, your skin is so dry, you must take care of that. Your beauty is your weapon. And Petra does this thing that she had tried earlier, where she attempts to pull Raphael's heartstrings by pulling out this thing, a frisbee, as they call it, that she had been knitting or crocheting while they were on a beach. And it was supposed to be a hat for the baby that she was carrying at the time. Crocheting, it looks like. And the scene, it's just like sort of touching to me to see the two of them actually getting along, you know? And I'm not trying to say that she wasn't playing him at this point, because she probably already was. But it really, the vibe between them is so different. But they're on this beach and he's looking at the hotel and talking about how it is a good investment opportunity. And she says that she believes in him and maybe he should go for it. And all of this is part of the flashback of just her pulling out this hat that she was crocheting. So she's, you know, doing that thing where she's trying to summon the past. And she's also wearing this sort of like sexy corset, like robe combination, and really laying it on very thick and talking about, I know how much you want that. And I know how much I want you. And she comes toward him and she starts to kiss him. And it's very clear that he's having a bit of a hard time resisting. It's such a shame to know that, like, while she's approaching him, it's all put on. That's not to say that she's not attracted to him, because, you know, he fine. But the look that she got when her mother was like, you know what to do. It was a look of a woman who's like, God damn it, I don't feel like this. I don't want to. So we find out later that they did not have sex, but it was a very close thing. And when he starts the conversation out, he says, I don't want to fight anymore. And she says, me neither. And really seems to think he means reconcile. And he pulls out divorce papers. And she says to him, "You were about to have sex with me yesterday. We stopped." "Yes, but I could tell you didn't want to." "Petra, please, let's keep what dignity we have left." There is something about that line that was really brutal to me. It was him basically saying, I know you're trying to fuck me literally, to fuck me figuratively, and I'm not having it. And it's, nobody wants to be called out on that. Especially when, like, you being able to fuck him is your weapon. If he acknowledges your weapon and is able to refuse it, that's it. That's the end of it being a weapon. And she's like, you know, if you don't have me here, either she will keep the baby or you are going to have to share custody. And he says, I'm hoping we won't. And she's just like, you will. And I'm like, yeah, dude, you will. And she says, we have to work it out, and we can. And he says, not if I don't love you anymore. And she just rears back and says, you make me sick. And he says, I understand. So sign the papers, you get $250,000, and we'll be done with each other. And I was like, wow, that was cold-blooded. I'm proud of him. It's what needs doing. Although I bet once I find out exactly what it is that Petra is desperate to accomplish, I'm going to have a lot more sympathy for her and wish that she had pulled this off. I think that there's a part of me that's going to be like, ah, man, girl, you maybe could have done it. But at the moment, I don't know her motivating factors. And I am just over here like, good for you, dude. Really drew a line in the sand. So he goes and has the conversation with Jane about the fact that they're going to have a divorce. And she has to be honest with him about the fact that this does change things for her, and that they are going to have to each think long and hard about what they want and come to some sort of agreement, and that nothing is perfect. He tells her, if you want me to only see my kid on weekends, I'll fight for more time. And she's like, yeah, we'll figure out custody arrangements. I know it's not going to be easy, but we are going to have to make it work. And the reason that she says that she is going to fight to make it work is because the second dinner that she had with Rogelio didn't go great. He had gone to see Shamara first, and Shamara tells him about the hard time that he is having, or that she is having with Jane, and he tries to take responsibility. He's like, because of me. And she, as a grown-ass woman who is very responsible, says, no, because of me. And I was very proud of her. And she's like, she's mad, and I get why. I had my reasons, but like, you know, and when Jane had pushed her on what her reasons were, she says, I didn't know what he would do if he found out about you. Like, he might try and take you away from me. Who knows? And it was easier to not tell you. And Jane says, easier for you. And I was like, yeah, I mean, easier potentially for you as well in some ways. But like, at this point, it certainly doesn't look like it was easier for you. So Rogelio, feeling a little bit responsible for this problem and also wanting to exert father figureness in a way that is not appropriate at this time, when he has his dinner with Jane, which I have to mention, they got like Thai takeout, I think, because she read it in his biography. So she's doing her homework despite the fact that that is just so insulting, but she's still reading it. But he tries to push the fact that she should be more understanding of her mother's decision and respect it more, and says something about how I was an idiot as a kid and she was right to keep it from me. And I thought this was a really good point. Jane rebuts with like, yeah, look, you only found out about me a year and a half ago. So for me, this is all fresh and exciting, and you just found out. I have been thinking about you and who you are every day of my life for 23 years, all I have thought about is where you are, who you are, what it would be like to meet you. I have asked the questions and been lied to by the only person I had in my life that I really trusted, other than our abuela. It's not the same situation. You don't get to dictate to me how I should feel about it when you really have no concept what it's like for a lie of that magnitude to be dropped, you know? And I was like, I didn't really think about the fact that he hadn't known about her this whole time, but yeah, that makes sense. But he shows up at the hotel the next day and he tells her, like, look, I get it that you don't want to force things, but I have to tell you that now that I know who you are, to me, I am not going to be giving up, and I'm not just going away. I am going to keep trying. And she realizes that this is something they have in common, and it's why she goes and talks to Raphael about it. And Raphael is pretty stone-faced at the news, especially because he and Michael are doing nothing but butting heads this whole episode. So the whole thing with Sinrostro is they don't want Raphael to know about Sinrostro at all, if they can help it. So when Michael and his partner are asking for information about who was working that night, Raphael is like, well, why do you ask? Do you think it's one of my staff? And they don't want to tell him anything. And he's getting really irritated because he feels like Michael is abusing his position of power in the investigation to just kind of needle him, which we know is kind of true. Like, Michael is feeling a way about the fact that he knows his wife-to-be has been having sexual dreams about him. And we know as viewers that she had feelings for him. And Michael could very clearly see that a few different times. He was not wrong in his suspicions. So, yeah, he's being a little bit petty with it. But it is also truly the way that they are supposed to approach the investigation. And Raphael is taking it more personally than he probably should. Like, yeah, there's a smirking smugness to the way Michael's telling him we can't let you know any of that information, but he's not wrong and he's not lying and keeping things from him that he otherwise could share. So Raphael already has his dander up about this. And then Michael has the information about who was on the shifts that night. And this was the moment, actually, because Jane starts going through Michael's files in the car, I think, and notices the schedule and is like, oh, Disgusting Kyle, was that his name? There's some bellhop who is like a real gross dude, very sexually harassy. And he was on shift that night, but he's not on the list that was given to Michael. And she points that out. So Michael goes to Raphael and is like, yo, what's the deal about the fact that this guy wasn't on the list? We're finding out whether or not information's being purposely withheld. And the whole thing with the two of them is just, now Raphael is starting to have some maybe feelings, more sexual fantasy stuff, it seems like, about Jane. And so his irritation with Michael has like ramped up to a different level in a different direction. And when he is sitting there with the two of them in his office, he is glaring at their hands because they're holding hands and really kind of having each other's backs in a way that I think he's just realizing how him and Petra aren't like this anymore. That there is just that this is gone for him in his life. And Michael is being very straightforward about the fact that he wants what Jane wants and he will support her no matter what. And when they're alone together, he says something to Michael like, oh, really? Are you going to let this happen? And Michael is very firm about, yeah, I'm going to do what needs doing. So the Man, it's so frustrating because like, I really appreciate the fact that Michael saw the light in terms of keeping the baby not being the worst thing in the world. It would be really hard and be, I get it, but also knowing how much he's still lying, I'm just like, God damn it, dude. Tom, disgusting Tom, that's his name. Bellboy Tom has a record and he's AWOL. That's the text Michael gets right after their meeting with Raphael. So Jane is at home and she's at Michael's place and she's going to be making tacos and wear his Ronaldo jersey. Apparently she can't find it and she starts looking around and I was like, okay, she didn't find the photos before. She is about to find them now. And as she is looking there, we cut to Raphael and Rose walking down the hall of the hotel and him talking about how he can't stand the fact that this guy he really detests is going to be involved in raising his kid. And Rose rightfully like gives him a look and says, do you have feelings for her? Because he says something like, I just don't know what Jane's doing with him. So yeah, Rose figures it out. Raphael, do you have feelings for her? And he says, it's complicated. The narrator says, not that complicated. He liked her. And as he is saying this, we see Jane finding the photos and realizing, and then we cut to Rose screaming because Bellboy Tom it looks like a corkscrew has been jabbed into his aorta and he is dead in the hallway. He has not fully died. When they come up to him and say, who did this? He wakes up just long enough to say, Sin Rostro. And then he dies. And I have to say, there's something really fucked up but hilarious about the fact that he still has that toothpick in his mouth as he's dying. There's like blood in his mouth and everything. And I was just like, man, didn't spit that toothpick out though. It's still there. So that is what leads them to having to tell him about Sinrostro, the connection that he potentially had with Zaz. And really, they have very thin information they're even working on, but they're like, you cannot tell anybody else about this. And then we have the scene with Petra, who is deeply ashamed to have to go to her mother with these divorce papers. And she's apologizing and saying, I really thought it was going to work out. And her mother's saying, I know you did, but it's done. No use worrying. You'll just ruin your skin. Come and sit. And I have to admit, I did not see this coming. She's taking her bracelet and rings off. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. She's about to like lotion her hands up. That makes sense. And then she punches Petra in the eye. The look that Petra gives her, and she's looking back at Petra like, come on, bitch. You really thought I was just going to be like, oh, it's fine. And at the end of the episode, we have Petra about to accuse Raphael of hitting her. I want to file a police report. And I guess this is going to be flat out blackmail. That she is going to say, if you divorce me, I will destroy your reputation. I'll let everybody think that you're a wife beater. Which, y'all know I'm not a big fan of lying about domestic violence or rape being a part of a storyline. This is a real iffy thing, but the show isn't saying it's a good thing or even a frequent thing. They're just like, yeah, well, this woman wants what she wants and she's gonna do underhanded shit, even if it's like gross and fucked up. And honestly, like in a lot, you all know, I listened to the Snapped podcast, Snapped Women Who Kill. And I am not saying that this is a common occurrence, because there are a lot of stories on that show where women are accused of lying about a man in order to like color his reputation and thus make it a little bit more sympathetic that they murdered him. And in a lot of them, based on just what I'm hearing, I'm like, no, he was beating her. Like, all the signs are there, and people's only evidence that he didn't was she never went to the cops, which women often don't, because why would you? Because cops don't care. And 2, we knew him really well, and he was not that kind of man, which they never are to the people they aren't beating. That's the point. That's how they are. So a lot of the time, I think those women were telling the truth, and they just weren't believed. And so it's framed in a podcast episode about them being a murderer as if they were making it all up. But there have been a couple where it seems pretty definitive. This woman never mentioned this man was beating her until she needed to convince another man to kill him for her. Those are the times where it seems like, okay, yeah, I think she was full of shit. Because she would have been seeing this guy for, months, and this never came up. It was never mentioned. But then once she decides that she's going to get rid of him, all of a sudden she's relaying these harrowing stories and getting this guy who's starting to have feelings for her all riled up and protective. And that means that they go out and do a murder thinking that they're rescuing a woman. And then these dudes come to find out later that no such thing was happening. So all that to say, I don't think that these kinds of lies never happen. I definitely think that they do, but I think that those are such extreme cases that they barely count to me, So I always have this real icky feel when it comes to this sort of things beginning in a story. Again, though, we're dealing with telenovela stuff, and a woman like blackmailing a man by lying about this sort of thing makes sense, I guess. Like, people are going to be doing shit. We've had actual murder, and I have been like less upset about that than her lying about him punching her in the face. I think it's just because nobody has ever told a murder victim, you weren't murdered. You're just making it up. So it's just got a very different kind of baggage to it. But that said, it's a show. I'm just really curious what her secret is, though, Petra's. And I feel like whatever it is might be a little bit connected to whatever's going on with Michael, but not in a way that either of them are aware of. Anyway, so yeah, the episode ends with Jane confronting Michael and just being like, dude, I can't believe you knew. You didn't tell me. And he says something about like, it was an investigation. I was protected. And she's like, give me the whole. No. Give me a break. That's bullshit. You know why you lied. And he tries to defend himself with, there's this moment here where she says, I told you this morning about Petra cheating on him with his best friend, and you like stood there and acted surprised. And he said, I know, and I felt terrible. And that's all he says. And very rightfully, she just goes, are you kidding me? And I was like, good for you, girl. Because yeah, I felt awful. And so what? Who fucking cares how you felt? Like, shut up. And yeah, he says like, I freaked out. I didn't want the baby, but I changed my mind. I changed my mind. And she says, you were about to let me give that baby to a couple who would have been totally wrong. Again, I made a mistake. And she just says, a mistake. And she gets up and leaves. There's no, a mistake is blank, blank, blank. This isn't a mistake. They don't have to do that anymore. It's been said twice in the episode. We're just jumping right to, oh, a mistake. And he tries to grab her and she says, let go of me. And when she turns around, he says, I'm sorry. He has both his hands up and his eyes are full of tears. And he's saying, I screwed up. I was scared. I was stupid. Everything I did because I love you. Sir, I'm sorry. Wrong again. No, you didn't. You didn't. You lied to get the life you wanted to have, whether it was what she wanted or not. And you've realized your mistake, and you have tried to take it back, and you were unsuccessful, and it is time to own up to the fact that you were being really selfish. And you were potentially putting a kid in a situation with parents who would use that child like a fucking poker chip, and you didn't care as long as your life wasn't disturbed, because ultimately the values that she has do not align with yours. She cares about this child in a way that you simply don't, and I don't know if you can at this point. Maybe once the child is born and you look at this baby, this infant, there will be some kind of connection and you will get it. But at the moment, this kid's hypothetical and he doesn't care. And he doesn't really seem to understand why she does. And trying to say, I lied because I love you. No, absolutely not, sir. No, I feel for him in some ways. I believe that losing her is killing him and that he really is hugely sorry. I think that he, in a lot of ways, understands how fucked up what he did was. But I don't feel like he understands enough because of the argument he's making here. He is still defensive in a way that if he really, really comprehended, I don't think he would be anymore. And yeah, that's pretty much that. We have her leaving and she goes home and like cries in her mother's arms. And it's fucking awful. You guys, I hated this for her. I hate it. So that is the end of the episode. I am so far over time, but this was the last recording of the night. So I just decided to go for it. All right. I'm going to wrap. Thank you guys so much for listening. Love you very much. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.